Quick disclaimer, this film is approximately 1% torture and 0% gardens. Hi guys, before we get into it, the usual disclaimer that you'll find all my other Amicus reviews in my Amicus playlist, and I guess there will be some spoilers today. So after my little detour into the world of Amicus sci-fi, we're returning today to the horror anthology films, and it's these sorts of films that got me into Amicus in the first place. Previously, I've covered Dr. Terrace House of Horrors. Today it's the turn of Torture Garden. Unlike Dr. Terrace House of Horrors, a film that I have a relationship with going back the best part of 30 years, Torture Garden is one that I only saw for the first time maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I was going through a little period where I was catching up on all the portmanteau films I hadn't yet seen. And I remembered thinking this one was all right, albeit maybe not one of the strongest in the series, but I was certainly keen to check it out for a second time and discover whether the film was going to get better in my estimations or possibly worse. You never know how these things can go. Now, in terms of how I'm going to review this film today, I'm going to do it exactly the same way that I always review a horror anthology film. So I'll start by talking about the wraparound story, and then I'll move into the main stories in the same sequence that they appear in the movie. We've got 4 main stories instead of 5 this time, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. It might mean more quality. Spoiler, it doesn't. But let's dive in. Let's jump into the world of Torture Garden. We'll begin with some spooky goings-on at a fairground. It should have just been called Torture Fairground, this movie. I mean, that would have given it a more suitable identity, surely, but whatever. So the wraparound story takes place in a little horror museum full of torture devices and things. It's set inside a fairground. And at the beginning of our story, Burgess Meredith is showing a bunch of people around this place. And at the end of the tour, he says to them that he's got an extra scary exhibit out back. And for £5 extra per person, he's willing to show them what that is. Now, this would never work in real life. You wouldn't get £5 out of people without at least giving them some kind of idea what they're going to get in return. But in this film, 4 people part with their cash at the same time, as unlikely as that sounds. Maybe it's just the fact that it's Burgess Meredith doing the tour, because he is very magnetic. I mean, as a viewer, I just feel like I'm hanging on every word of his during this prologue, this linking story. So these characters, they go out back, and there's like a waxwork doll holding some shears, and supposedly if you look into the shears, you will then get a vision or some kind of daydream about a future happening that will affect you. And then once you're done looking at this vision, you then have the choice going forwards whether to let this future premonition sweep you along or whether you change your own fate. And so this is the basis for our film. We have 4 different people having this vision, and we get to see what happens in these visions one by one. It's not as good a wraparound as what we got in Dr. Terrace House of Horrors. The fairground setting's fine. I would have liked to have seen a few more exhibits in this place rather than just having the camera constantly on Burgess Meredith as he's giving his promises and trying to excite the crowd. But the fact that it's this actor, though, it does make this whole setting better than it otherwise would be, I think. And I like this actor from other things as well. I've seen him in the Rocky films. I remember him from Adam West's Batman as well. He does give a certain amount of gravitas to this whole situation. The fact that we've got Jack Palance in the scene just quietly smouldering away in the background, that adds a little bit as well. So I'm absolutely fine with this opening, and I'm pretty happy to come back to this little pavilion room in between all the stories as well. Our first story begins with what I can only describe as a poor man's Steve McQueen going to visit his rich uncle who's dying, but he's blatantly only doing so because he wants to get his hands on the estate once the uncle's passed away. I mean, this guy is just a lazy playboy who thinks everything in life should just be given to him. I found him extremely repulsive, in all honesty. Once the uncle has died, then it seems like this Budget McQueen character has struck gold, but then he realises that the uncle was keeping some kind of demonic entity in the cellar, and suddenly he's into a really dangerous life or death predicament. And I'm not going to take the story any further than that. I will let you discover what happens for yourself. The nature of this entity is a little bit far-fetched, it's got to be said, but my main reason for being a little bit lukewarm on this story is just the main character. I really didn't like this guy. He's so obviously after money and nothing else that you just can't warm to him at all. I think they should have made this character a little bit more vague as to his intentions, and then I could have got on his side when he gets into trouble with the entity later in the story. But as it is, I didn't really care one way or the other whether he died at the end of this or not. I found it difficult to know where to plant my flag. Was I on the side of the entity or Budget McQueen? I had no idea, so I was just kind of floating through the story, not really caring, in all honesty. So a very average start to the anthology, this. And this is a problem with this entire film, actually. It does have some characters who you really struggle to root for. Now, in Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, all the characters were quite likeable, and then they got into some difficult situations. Even the characters who did wrong in that movie, like the guy who went to Jamaica and stole the music, or Christopher Lee's art critic, even though they were doing bad, there was still some real charm to those characters. I still found myself liking those people, maybe mainly due to the performances, I guess, by people like Christopher Lee. But in this film, I couldn't really say the same about some of these dastardly characters we're asked to root for. And this guy is a case in point, that the guy in this first story. So not massively into this one, even though as a horror story, it felt quite original. I've not seen anything like it. It was all right, but definitely nothing special. Terror Over Hollywood is about a young woman who gets herself into Hollywood only to discover that her co-stars and all the producers and directors are not actually human. This is another one where the main character is not very likeable. The first thing we see of her is her doing the dirty over her housemate to ensure that it's she who gets to have dinner with a big shot producer and not the housemate. So straight away I'm thinking, what a bitch. Looking at the previous story and this one, it seems to me that this movie likes to set up these despicable characters, and the enjoyment that we're meant to get from watching them is knowing that there's going to be a big comeuppance at the end of the tale. But the trouble is, even the comeuppances are not actually that great. Like the guy in the previous story, it would have been a bigger punishment spending his life in prison and being laughed at rather than just quickly killed off. And in this story, the woman's punishment seems to be that she's still going to get the big, lavish Hollywood lifestyle that she's always wanted, just not quite in the exact way that she dreamed of. But it all falls a bit flat, really. Plus, this version of Hollywood that you see in this film, it feels more 40s and 50s than 1967, than when Torture Garden came out. The big question that seems to be at the heart of this story is, ever wondered how Hollywood stars seem to live longer, look good for longer? Well, here's the sci-fi explanation for that you didn't previously know. But do people actually think that about actors and actresses, that they live longer and they somehow look great for longer in their lives than normal people? I've never thought that. I mean, you get the occasional person like Tom Cruise who looks amazing at 60, but people know that that's all makeup and bullshit, right? I mean, if you go round to his house on a Sunday morning, he's guaranteed he'll look a complete mess because the cameras aren't rolling. He's not had his makeup put on and stuff. Unless this is just a perception that people had back in the 60s. Back then, did people genuinely believe that Hollywood stars lived longer? I don't know, but I don't think that's a thing in 2024. The only enjoyment I got out of this story really is an interesting bit of background dressing. So there's a moment where the main character, she goes out for dinner with this producer, and we see like a giant snow globe in the restaurant. It's got two models inside it, and the snow coming down onto these models. And it's just incredible. It's like one of the most amazing little bits of set design I think I've ever seen. It's so odd that it would be in this story. I'm surprised the camera didn't linger on it more, actually, but that's not saying a whole lot, I guess, that, you know, a little bit of the background was the best thing about a story. This one actually has a likeable leading lady, and they didn't have to do that because the story is about a woman who starts dating a famous pianist. So they could have made her a gold digger, and that would have been in line with everything that's been in the movie so far. But no, they've made her a nice woman with honourable intentions, and I liked that. I was ready for a character like that at this stage. The trouble is, this guy's grand piano doesn't want him to have a girlfriend. It's alive, this piano. It's a demonic piano. It's the Christine of pianos, and this is all building up to a finale where the piano and the new girlfriend will go head to head in a weird little battle, as brief as it is. This story, though, is very much just a punchline. There's not much that happens until that final scene. I think this story would have been better as a written story rather than something that you're actually seeing play out in front of you, because I think then you could just use your imagination a lot more and it would be scarier, whereas actually getting to see the piano in motion just kind of raises a little bit of a titter. Plus you get that trope in this where somebody just stumbles very slowly backwards and yet falls through a window to their death. That just does not happen in real life. I could run and throw myself against my living room window. I'm not going through it. I'll probably just bounce off it. I might leave some cracks on the window. I might damage the thing, but I'm not going through it. Just does not happen. How often in movies do you see somebody get shot and then they'll be like, and then stumble back and fall right through a window, not just bounce off it. I don't know, it just irritates me whenever I see it. The best thing I like about this story, again, similar to the previous story, is the set design. This guy's house is very lavish. I liked the style of it and the colours that have been used. The first scene that the woman turns up to see this guy, she's wearing blacks and whites. The floor is blacks and whites, and there's like a shot where you can see her, the floor, the piano, and it all just looks really good. But I'm not sure that's the greatest of signs that 2 stories in a row now I've been thinking more about the style and how good it looks rather than the actual horror or the storytelling. The final story is not just the best in the anthology, it's the best by a country mile. I mean, it's not even close. This is the one with Peter Cushing and Jack Palance. It's a little bit strange that we've got 2 of the biggest stars in the film in the same story. You'd think that they would have spread the big name stars throughout the story somewhat. I could particularly imagine Jack Palance in Terror Over Hollywood. I could picture him playing one of those movie producers and him doing a grin as bits of skin start to fall off his face to reveal what's underneath. But whatever, he's in this story, and his performance actually is the standout of Torture Guard, and he even manages to outshine Cushing. It does happen occasionally, but Palance is brilliant in this. I've not seen a hell of a lot of him. I remember him from Tango and Cash, but other than that, not a lot. 10 minutes of City Slickers once, maybe. So this story is about super fandom. These 2 characters that Cushing and Palance are playing, they're both into Edgar Allan Poe in a big way. They're obsessed with collecting his memorabilia and unfinished manuscripts and stuff like that to a really unhealthy degree. And once they both realise that they share the same passion, they end up having a drinking night around at Cushing's house, and he's got like a cellar full of hidden things to do with Allan Poe, really rare items, and Jack Palance is getting into a sweat because he's so enjoying seeing all this stuff. But there's such a great atmosphere to this story. The performances are incredible, as you'd expect from these 2, but the dialogue's really sharp. I'm just on the edge of my seat, hanging on every word that the actors are saying, and I know that this whole situation is going to go sideways. I just don't know how or when. But the clever thing about the story, aside from the fact that it's got a really great atmosphere, I'm watching Palance more than Cushing because I'm expecting his character to be the one to really make this situation go bad, because he doesn't own any of this stuff and he's a little bit jealous of what Cushing's got. I figure the horror is probably going to originate from Palance, but it actually doesn't. It's the Cushing character who's hiding the big secret, so that's a nice twist away from what my expectations were. The ending in this is a little bit far-fetched, I suppose, but that doesn't matter. I'm a little bit confused with the final shot in the film, but It's just a great little story, and it's one that I wouldn't mind seeing remade in a more modern horror anthology. Except these days, you'd probably have it that I don't know. The subject of the whole thing would be Taylor Swift, or maybe you could have a couple of Halloween obsessed fans who are obsessed with John Carpenter or something like that. I wouldn't mind. I'd like to see this remade in a more modern skin, but as it is, it's the 1960s. It's Edgar Allan Poe, someone I don't personally know that much about, but I just really, really enjoyed this one. And like I said, it's absolutely the best thing that Torture Garden has to offer. So it's time for the wrap-up, although before we do that, I quickly want to say that Michael Ripper is in this film. He's in the wraparound section with Burgess Meredith. For some reason, he's the only person in that segment who doesn't go on to get their own main story. Why would you do that to Michael Ripper? Another negative mark for Torture Garden. I do own this on Blu-ray. It's got a very green box. Picture quality, very good. It's a really good copy of the film, albeit it doesn't have anything in the way of features. I think this might be one of those, actually, where it just plays by itself once you put the disc in. The three actors mentioned on the front are Meredith, Palance and Cushing, who just happen to be in the best content in this film. All the stories that aren't that good don't involve any of those three actors, coincidentally. Right, shall we get to the bag of terror and see what sort of score I'm going to give this? So we got 1, 2, 3 bloody axes out of 5. I think that's a pretty generous score, given the fact that I only really like one of the 4 stories, and also the linking tale is pretty good as well. It's still got that 60s charm to it that makes a lot of these old films still very watchable. But I predicted coming into this review series that Torture Garden would be one of my least favourite of Amicus's horror anthology films, and I'd probably take that thought another step further on now and predict that this will actually be the lowest of the 7 for me. I just don't think there's any still to come that will be worse than this. From memory, Vault of Horror might be a bit of a mediocre one. Is that the one with the elevator? But most of them are really good. I'm looking forward to watching those ones as well. I can't think which one comes next, though. I think maybe Tales of the Crypt, but I'm not 100% sure. So I guess we'll just see. But for now, thanks for joining me, and I'll see you all again another time. Bye-bye.